Welcome very much, everyone, to this webinar, SAP meets OMT, Insights, Synergies, and Pathways into the Future. And the idea is that we have some great scholars here from both of the communities. We want to bring them together, address particular topics and have them discuss and provide their input to it. And the idea is basically to see where do we have synergies, where have we some overlaps, where have we maybe different perspectives on topics, and then take it into pathways into the future. How can we work together and how can we take this knowledge in order to have ongoing collaboration with everyone? So this webinar is sponsored by the SAP IG and the OMT division. My name is Lorenzo Scade. I'm from the European University Viadrina, and I'm moderating this discussion together with Ila from the CBS. You can see here. So to quickly introduce you to the people that you can see in the room, just some quick introductions. And I'll start by introducing the people, and so you probably will see we joined the outside part mostly of both divisions or interest group, but nevertheless I'll start with the people that we have picked out from the SAP side, and we have with us Jen Sloan, and Jen is a PhD candidate from the University of Alberta and interested in strategic management, SAP research, and future making, among other topics. We have Renate Kratochvil with us from the Stockholm School of Economics. And Renate is an assistant professor with interest in innovation and strategic management, who investigates how top managers and employees anticipate and navigate radical innovation. And we have David Seidl with us from the University of Zurich. And David is a professor of organization and management and has interests in corporate governance, organizational teams, top management teams, and many other topics. And he's one of the founding members of the SAP community. So we're very happy to have him with us today.
Thank you, Lorenzo. A warm welcome also from my side. And I'm delighted to introduce the 4 speakers from the OMT side. We have Chris Wickert from the VU University in Amsterdam, the Vrije Universiteit, where he's a full professor. And Chris' interests include CSR, corporate social responsibility, also linked to broader relationships with business and society. Then we have Kevin Lee, who is an assistant professor at the University of British Columbia, whose research focus is on the future of organizations, including technology, innovation, and how this also all comes together with the topic of entrepreneurship. We also have Renate Meyer from the VU of Vienna, where Renate is a full professor in organization studies. Her research interests include institutional organization theory and how organizations also influence society. And then we have Ignas Bruder from Dresden, where Ignas is a professor of business administration, and his research interests include strategy and business ethics, social entrepreneurship, corporate sustainability, among others. So it's a delight to be here with you all, and a big thank you to Lorenzo and to Christine for putting this together.
Thank you very much, Ila, for introducing the participants. Just a quick introduction of how the session will unfold. So the idea is to have pairs of scholars, one from the SAP community, one of the OMT community. Each of them has 5 minutes time to elaborate on the topic that they will introduce, and afterwards we will have 5 minutes for questions with regard to the specific topic. It's a short time slot because we actually want to have a joint Q&A session at the end to have a broader, to open up the discussion also for all of you and allowing for a broader discussion of how we can move forward, work together on these particular topics and so forth. Whenever you have questions, please feel free to write them in the chat. We will monitor the chat. Or raise your hand so that we can call on you and ask for your questions. So thanks a lot for turning in. So I would suggest that we start with the first pair and the first topic of creating impact, and it would be David and Chris, and we are very looking forward to your input.
Yeah, perfect. Let me just share my slides and let me know whether you can see the slides.
Yes, we see the slides.
Okay, can you see that in full screen?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, so I'm very excited to talk about this topic. First of all, I'm from the University of Zurich, but I also put the logo up of Universidad EAFIT, University in Colombia. I'm currently a visiting professor there. There's a huge strategy as practice community there, and they invited me to come over. And, I thought I should acknowledge that because it's a great community with great work that they're doing. Yeah, so creation of impact in all areas of management studies, practical relevance, impact is a big topic because we are in an area where we have an applied science, where we expected to contribute to practice to make an impact. In the past it was called practical relevance. Now I notice that people more and more talk about impact, but in the end it's very similar. So what I'm going to talk about is how SAP researchers have dealt with so the call for more impact. There being the lamentation that we have not enough impact and should have more impact. So let me start. The SAP approach to impact, point of departure is practices. It's strategy as practice, so obviously we look at practices of research and practices of the practice domains, the managerial practice or other areas of societal practice. The technical perspective, obviously mainly practice theories. So when SAP scholars reflected on practical impact, on practical relevance, they draw primarily on practice theories. Predominant focus has been on the impact on managerial practice, but lately more and more also on wider societal impact. Yeah? And one of the main issues that SAP scholars who have reflected on impact have called for is against the simplistic assumption that if you study practices, it is automatically practically relevant because you study the practitioner and the practice was practically relevant, and that's not true. Yeah, studying practice doesn't make it automatically practically relevant. Key issues here. Researchers and practitioners are both engaged in practices. So by examining sort of the relation between research and managerial practice, what they share is practices. And what is at the core of SAP research or SAP discussions on practical relevance is trying to understand the logic of practice. Yeah. So how do you engage in practice? So practical rationality in contrast to scientific rationality is sort of at the core. I'll talk a little bit more about it. What is key is the reflection on difference in logic of research practices versus managerial or other societal practices. And key thing is also practice theory offers a lens for capturing managerial practice, or generally practices, and so Feldman and Warline have talked about practicality of practice theory, and the focus is on conceptual relevance in contrast to instrumental. Now let me, I've got 2 slides on what practice scholars, strategy as practice scholars have looked at in particular. Yeah? One is one key thing is the discursive construction of impact. So how is impact and what impact means discursively constructed? And there's a great fairly short paper in the Hamdali et al. JMI exchange paper by Nicolini, where he talks about that impact is not an objective feature of research, so it's impactful or what, but it's discursively constructed. What we mean by impact, what we mean by practical relevance is something that's discussed, that is constructed in the in discourse, in the impact discourse. Yeah, and this impact discourse, what Nicolini is pointing out is this impact on this impact discourse is dominated by practitioners. It's very much a practitioner led discourse where practitioners have been calling for impact and they have defined what impact is. So what Nicolini is doing is he calls for regaining control of the impact narrative and for developing a more sophisticated impact narrative beyond simplistic impact narrative that is driven by practitioners. So this is one of the papers I find very important. Here, Kisa et al., it's a paper in the Academy of Management Annals, which I was involved in. It's not explicitly framed by strategy as practice, but it is in the spirit of strategy as practice. And there we identify 5 different strands of impact discourse. And we try to deconstruct sort of this impact discourse and why this impact discourse hasn't resulted in any impact on research. So we have this impact discourse, and this hasn't changed how we do research, and that's what is in this paper. So the second area where strategy, what strategy as practice scholars have looked at is they have looked at enhancing impact by reflecting on the onto-epistemological distinction between research and practice. So research and practice are very different. So practicing research and practicing, well, management is very different. And there are 3 studies in particular that I want to point out. One is, sorry, it's one by myself. That's probably why I was also invited to talk about it. That's why I also point out a couple of my own papers based on Bourdieu. And the key point is practice of researchers and practice of managerial practitioners are different. So there are different logics. And an issue that we have is that we as researchers are not aware of our research logic. So we practice research and assume that what we are doing there is objective or whatever, but it's itself guided by particular logic. So we have the fallacy of epistemic doxa. We assume that we are objective, but we are not. We have a particular logic behind it. And the fallacy of scholastic ethnocentrism is that we project our own scientific logic onto practice as if practice is acting or is functioning in the same way. And that restricts impact. Yeah. So there's a call for more reflexivity amongst researchers about the difference between the field of research and field of practice. Second one is Sandswerk and Zuckers in AMR, based on Heidegger, and they distinguish between scientific rationality, which treats the world as being made up of separate entities, and practical rationality. It's a rationality that acknowledges the ontological entwinement of the world. It's not separate entities, but the entities in the world are entwined. So there's a call for adopting practical rationality as sub-research and focus on practice breakdown, what practice breaks down, because there you see sort of this intertwinement between things in the world. And last one, Jasakovsky and Wilson, an older one in the European Management Journal, based on Schatzky and Aristotle. And they look at this, what they call the dissociation practice or process, dissociation process, that this transforms academic knowledge into practical knowledge. So academic knowledge becomes something different in practical knowledge. And they call for reflection on of us as researchers, as sub-researchers, on this dissociation process and develop knowledge that is more open to being dissociated and used in different ways by practitioners. And just as a side note, so we don't know what practitioners make out of our research knowledge. So it might, something might come out that's very different from what we initially might have thought about. Okay, so that was from my side, and I guess I was almost on time.
Almost, yes, David. Thank you very much. Chris, do you want to go ahead?
Yes, sure. So thank you. I stopped that David talked 8.5 minutes, so I have 90 seconds left. Is that correct?
You still have your 5 minutes.
I have one relatively simple slide that I want to share, and I want to use the time to give some high-level ideas that I hope will trigger some conversation, right? So this is not the time to go into great detail, but rather to convey how I see the whole thing, and it a little bit also reflects how we at JMS see the topic of impact. You know, we have been working quite a bit to attract impactful research and to kind of contribute to the conversation of how we can do better impactful research, so that intertwines a little bit. So what I want to share is four principles for how OMT research can be more impactful, and a little bit on how this relates to SAP. So what are these 4 principles that I think we have been doing and embracing them quite a bit already in the past few years, and I think it's a very good sign to see that this conversation about what impactful research is and so on is proliferating. At the same time, we need to get busy actually doing impactful research and maybe not so much talking about impactful research. That is perhaps a critical observation where I'm not saying I'm mastering this fully, and it's always easier said than done. Anyway, so what are these 4 principles that I think are hopefully, particularly for PhD students and early career scholars, helpful as a guidance? I think now, in light of the challenges we face in the world, and we all know them, so they don't need to be reiterated, now is the time to really put phenomenon and problem-driven research at the starting point of scientific inquiry, which means specifically from the OMT point of view, most, if not all, large-scale societal problems, which we can look at any level. So this doesn't imply a macro approach. This can be micro, meso, or macro. All of these problems have a managerial side or an organizational side to them, and I think this is what we should put at the center of our attention. So what in the empirical world around us, where is the challenge of how to best or most effectively organize or manage it? So think of that we know from climate science and natural science research what science-based targets to save the climate are, right? And we are not in the position to derive these targets because that's what climate scientists do. But I think where OMT, but equally SAP, I believe, has really something to offer is to the question how to effectively manage and organize these things. So take the Sustainable Development Goals, right? What they are. This is a huge conversation between political scientists and some economists and what have you. But all these goals are things that need to be effectively organized and managed. And that is, I think, the starting point where OMT should get more busy than currently looking at them. The consequence of this, I believe, is that we should really approach our research such that we start with the empirical puzzle related to the phenomenon and the real world problem. So the theoretical puzzle that we're often asked, or if not always asked, to emphasize in foreground when we publish in good journals, like what's your contribution to theory and so on. Yes, we need that. But I believe the way to impact is to start with an empirical puzzle and then make the theoretical puzzle the consequence of the empirical puzzle, not vice versa. So in a way that I think the road to impact goes by motivating your research based on an important empirical problem and then solve or at least try to better understand the problem with the help of theory. So in that sense, we need to see theory as a means to better understand real-world problems, not an end in themselves that is, for example, advanced with a more or less meaningless empirical illustration. I think this kind of takes these 2 principles a bit further. Once you check 1 and 2, I think we should also acknowledge that impact can take different forms. And so David talked about theoretical foundations of impact, which I believe is very helpful. We tried to push this conversation a bit further in a recent editorial that I published in Journal Management Studies, which maybe some of you know, and I can put it also in the chat. Where we argue that, well, practical implications is one form of impact, and we're not making a case against that, but rather we're saying, well, even though your paper doesn't have practical implications, it can be very impactful in another dimension. For example, the educational impact or so, or scholarly impact that pieces can have. Business scholars, for example, so we argue, have remained relatively silent when it comes to policy impact. But that's certainly when we look at the effectiveness of putting science-based climate targets into action, that's something where perhaps we can say and should say more about. And then the last point, because now we're kind of reflecting how OMT and SAP can or cannot go together. I think we need to emphasize the complementarity of all these perspectives, and you can replace OMT with whatever, and you can replace SAP with whatever, basically. But I think we don't need to, or we should not waste our time discussing which perspective is better or superior in addressing and understanding a particular problem. No, the problems we face are big enough, or they're so big that we need multiple perspectives to look at them and then try to tease out the complementarity of these perspectives rather than saying, well, this one's better than that. That is not really leading us anywhere. Yes, these are my 4 principles, and I look forward to the conversation and questions.
Thank you so much, both David and Chris, to kick off our discussion on the topic of the impact. Let me just double check if any raised hands are in the room. I don't see any raised hand. We have one question in the chat, but it's yeah, big clap indeed to you both. We have one question in the chat, but looking at it, it might be a better moment for us to address it in the Q&A. So I will ask then for our upcoming speakers and to take it off from here, and for our participants that are writing in the chat to just be a little patient for when we open up the Q&A for more sophisticated questions than just some brief questions at the end of presentation. Thank you both, and I'll leave the floor to Jen.
Thanks so much. I'm actually really happy to follow David and Christopher, because I think our phenomenon, Kevin and I are talking about AI, and this is, I think, both a problem and a phenomenon that we get a lot of interesting ideas between the two perspectives. When Kevin and I spoke to kind of discuss how we wanted to structure this, it was the day after Trump was elected. And so we opted, I think, in our lack of energy on that day, to not do slides. So you just get to listen to me chat a little bit. One of the significant parts of studying AI has been grappling with how novel is this technology? Is it really just a continuum from technological change of the past, or is it fundamentally different? And so Kevin and I were thinking through that a little bit, and what SAP and OMT lenses offer us, and trying to unpack that. So we're going to speak a little bit about this, and I'm going to talk about it from an SAP perspective. And I have kind of 2 main points. One, SAP's unique contributions to understanding AI, and then why AI might feel a little bit different when we look at it from a more micro level. So first up, SAP, I think, allows us to be able to see how AI isn't just something, a technology or a tool that organizations adopt. It helps us see how they're adapted and enacted within specific organizational contexts. So AI, and in my research and in my reading, it reveals how strategists, SAP reveals how strategists use AI to transform their daily routines. It helps us understand how existing practices are challenged, reinforced, subverted. And this kind of localized lens, I think, it is really important, because AI really doesn't operate in the same way everywhere. It's so shaped by context, and SAP allows us to be able to see that really clearly. Highlighting the co-creation of strategies, kind of my next piece. A lot of my own research is looking at predictive analytics and how these types of tools often alter how decisions are framed and justified within the context of organizations, and that shapes the entire process of strategizing. A last point here, tracing feedback loops. So one of the things that I think is interesting about AI is its recursive nature. It learns and it adapts in ways that other technologies haven't. And it creates these interesting feedback loops that we have a really great toolkit to be able to trace and unpack and understand, to show us how AI refines and disrupts organizational practices over time. So my second point, why does AI feel so different than other technologies at a micro level? I think its autonomy and its agency are really, really key points here. So when we look at it on the ground, AI becomes a co-actor, not just a tool. And so its capacity for autonomous decision-making, like when algorithms independently select job candidates, or when they create when they create directions of where our resources are going to flow and where they are not going to flow, that sort of thing. It helps to raise being able to see this raises accountability, and it creates kind of a sense of question that maybe weren't as prevalent with previous technologies. This blurred human technology boundary, what counts as human creativity, what counts as machine output. You know, you think about tools like ChatGPT, they produce outputs from really, really confusing sources and indistinguishable oftentimes from human work, reshaping how a lot of us in academia, but also other professions like journalism, education, they've fundamentally changed how things are happening on the ground with respect to these occupations and professions. And then lastly, embedding and challenging values. AI really forces us, I think, as a society, as individuals, as organizations, to confront values in new ways. For example, if we go back to that hiring, there's a tool out there called Wonderlic, and it has capacity to skew a lot of bias, but it's an incredibly popular tool. And we can see how these tools, they can force the practitioners to do the improvising. They can force the practitioners to do the adapting or the resisting of these kinds of outputs. And so these tensions between technology and values, I see a lot of opportunity for SAP scholars to provide invaluable insights on that. But I think OMT also has a really useful toolkit to be able to look at these things. So with that, I'm going to pass it to Kevin to chat through his points.
Thank you. I had a very good time talking with Jen about AI and everything else. I mean, it's something I research and am obsessed about. So, yeah, I think I was supposed to then present the alternate perspective, right? If Jen was sort of presenting the perspective that AI is new and there's something here that, you know, is my perspective was to be a little bit of a sort of a wet blanket and say, actually, is it really that new, right? I think this is actually kind of consistent, though, with the broader sort of sweep of theories that we have across OMT, and I'll just get into that in just a second, which is just to say that I think that some prominent AI/technology and OT scholars have alluded to this idea, right? That maybe AI is not quite as new as we think it is, right? So I'm here echoing that Betchke and O'Mahony, they recently wrote a piece in sort of Pedro Montero's sort of symposium on work, right? Where they were talking about we need to be more precise, right? In our theorizing about what's actually new. I'm echoing Barley's insight as well, Steve Barley's insight, that a sociology that sort of forgets its founders or forgets its early ideas will be sort of doomed to repeat over and over again, same ideas. And so if we go backward, right, if we actually take a look at this, technology is a form of rationalization, which I broadly conceive here as efficiency through mechanization, right, has been an interest as far back as the founding of the social sciences, right? So if we're thinking about here now Durkheim, we're thinking about Marx, we're thinking about Weber, right? Each of them were thinking about different technological forms of rationalization, right? The division of labor, the rise of bureaucracy, the rise of industrial capitalism. And I was talking with my office mate, Meyer Renate, the other day about this, and she was asking, like, but wasn't the nature of the existential crisis different back then? And I might argue, actually, that the existential crisis was about the same, right? If you read Weber's writings, for example, right, he was really worried that we were going to lose our sense of humanness, right, with the rise of bureaucracy. He says something along the lines of rationalization, or bureaucracy in particular, forms more perfectly the more it is dehumanized, right? And so you feel echoes of that even today, right, with AI. Such forms of rationalization, again, I think were then an obsession for scholars at the founding of OT. So you think about Taylorism, for example, with the idea that you can sort of mechanize human sort of behavior in ways on the shop floor, right? Make it super efficient, as contrasted with Hawthorne studies, which was thinking about how do we acknowledge the human side of work? So again, this idea of rationalization versus humanization being the cleft rock upon which OT was sort of founded. I think at stake is the same underlying theoretical issues with regard to AI, right? What is human? What is rational, right? This broad societal disruption. So this is just to say there may be an argument here for saying that, you know, there's not too much dramatically new, but rather we're sort of rehashing old sort of themes, right? Theoretical themes fundamentally. However, we did want to acknowledge that regardless of the stance you take, whether AI is new, whether AI is not new, right? I think there's compelling arguments for both. I think that you can take we can agree that AI provides the opportunity to basically study things that are important to the current moment, right? As well as the basic social processes that these sort of moments allow us to study. So for example, Jen and I were talking again, as Jen mentioned, we were talking in the day after Donald Trump was elected to the presidency in the United States. And of course, something that we were talking a lot about was the notion of value, right? Values, right? What do we as a society value? And it occurred to us that amid this moment of societal disruption, namely AI coming in, disrupting work, threatening to take over all of work, etc., that this is a huge societal disruption that's bringing out the notion of what do we value, right? What do we value enough to hold on to or let go, to augment or automate, right? And what occupations are we going to hold on to in the societal division of labor? What are we going to let go? And who are we going to let go by extension, right? And leave behind as we go toward the future. I think this, again, has broader relevance to other moments of societal disruption, things like COVID-19, the rise of the far right across the West, et cetera, et cetera. These are just basically dramatic societal moments of disruption, right, that are going to help us reflect on, or help sort of make us reflect, right, on what we collectively value, and sort of how we're going to move forward into the future. So this is just to say, I think that there are some things specific to AI, right, with regard to value. There's something's broader about value that AI can help us to kind of shed light on, and the theories can sort of travel across settings, right? But yeah, at the very least, it was super a generative discussion that Jen and I had. So we're hoping that it'll sort of energize the Q&A. Thank you.
Sorry. Thank you very much for you, and thank you also for letting us participate in this conversation that the two of you had. So great stuff. Is there any, because I've been looking into the chat, but is there any question that we should be addressing at this moment directed at this pair and the question of researching AI? Just looking to the room. Because if we don't have any, then I would suggest that we move to the next pair, which are David and Renate, right? And you two will be talking about grand challenges, and we're very looking forward to your input.
Yeah, so so you can see the slides?
Yes.
Ah, perfect. Okay, good. Yeah, so I'm talking also about studying grand challenges from a SAP perspective. So how have SAP scholars addressed grand challenges? And again, I'll talk a little bit about how or what are the areas or the perspectives that have adopted, and what have they said about it. So let me jump to my next slide. Yeah, just generally grand challenges, to introduce the topic, is an umbrella concept, a very vague concept. It's inconsistently used. There's a great paper by Seidl and Johanna Meyer and somebody else, I can't remember right now, where she sort of deconstructs this concept as vague and so on. But it's a concept, or it's a term that is broadly used, and we vaguely broadly know what we mean by it. Generally, grand challenges are characterized by complexity, the interrelatedness of many different aspects, uncertainty, we don't know how they play out, and evaluativity, there's some normative aspect to it. So we know what needs, what the problems are here, and what would make things better or worse, but we don't know how to get there. Now, SAP scholars have predominantly focused on this first aspect, the complexity aspect. Yeah, it's super wicked problems, or sometimes also conceptualized as meta problems with societal relevance, like climate change, poverty, inequality, and so on. Now, the key aspect that sub-scholars have looked at is relationality. So the relations between different issues that make up a grand challenge. So this leads to problems of making sense of grand challenge, because there are so many different issues. And there are unclear, second thing, there are unclear effects of individual practices, both in the creation and mitigation of these grand challenges, because these actions and practices are tightly interrelated and so on. So we don't know what one practice, how one practice plays out in the context of other practices. So I talk about just generally how grand challenges have been approached. Starting point again is practices. Practice of making sense of them, collaboration practice to deal with grand challenges, practices that create or mitigate grand challenges. The ontology, primarily flat ontology, so it's about looking at sort of individual actions, practices in the small, in the concrete, and then zooming out to the broad. How are these practices relate to others in order to bring bringing about the grand challenges or mitigating grand challenges? So it's about zooming in and zooming out rather than talking about levels. The predominant perspectives are practice theories and sense-making, the sense-making perspective. Key focus, and here a great paper by Couture in the forthcoming Encyclopedia of Strategizing Practice, where she outlines how SAP has looked at grand challenges. So 4 points, what they're looking at: sense-making practices, mitigation practices, generation, regeneration practice of these grand challenges, and coping practices. And I'll briefly talk about how these, how studies have approached that. So first, practices of making sense of grand challenges. That's very central in strategized practice. Point of departure, grand challenges are strategically relevant to organizations, so we need to understand them, or organizations need to understand them. How do they understand them? The 2 papers that are highlighted here. It's inter-organization sense-making, organizations getting together, trying to make sense of these challenges by bringing in different knowledge, but there are dynamics of bringing in people who have particular knowledge interest, which might not align with the issues that you want to address, and then you bring in new people, they bring in other issues, and then you have the issue of translating between contexts and so on. So this is one area that has been looked at. Then a paper I've been also involved in, Seidl, in British Journal of Management, the role of materiality in helping to deal with the complexity of grand challenges, in making sense of them. And a paper, I just mentioned this, by Madalena Popp, which I have been involved in, which also won the best conference track prize at Ignas and so on. So I mention it because it has received some attention, where Madalena in particular looked at how the creation of communication spaces allows addressing grand challenges, and how these the shaping of communication spaces allows, or dynamically shaping communication spaces allows capturing the complexity of grand challenges, or making sense of grand challenges. Second one is practice of mitigating or generating, so both generating grand challenges but also mitigating them. Point of departure, well, we treat those practices as strategic, that have consequences, and obviously organizational practices have consequences on a societal level, so that's why we need to study them. Yeah. There's by Couture and Paula Jaskowski and others a great paper in AMJ. By the way, they forgot to mention SAP in that paper. They should have. They look at the dynamics of inter-stakeholder collaboration to mitigate corporate governance, grand challenges, and the obstacles that there are and the unintended effects of that. Second one is a great paper by Seidl and others. Note, they do not explicitly refer to SAP, but they sort of are in the spirit of SAP. They show how grand challenges are created and potentially mitigated by the strengthening and weakening of relations between many different mundane practices. That's, for example, the initiative to eradicate child labor leading to poverty. These are practices that eradicate child labor, but at the same time create poverty and social inequality. And I just show the figures they have in the paper. You don't have to understand them, and you don't have to be able to read them. It just shows here how over time each picture is one point in time, how practices are differently related, stronger and weaker related, creating different larger patterns being that grand challenges. So this is a great paper if you want to see how from a flat ontology perspective, looking at these practices, how you can explain how grand challenges emerge and how grand challenges can be mitigated and how this might create other grand challenges. Last one, practice of coping with grand challenges. Yeah, so grand challenges pose strategic threats to organizations. So organizations need to develop coping practices. And here I mention a project by Maria Andrea De Villa and Bija and Jonathan Coe and others, where they looked at the mitigation practices amongst coffee in the coffee growing region, or the association of coffee growers, how they develop new practices to respond to climate change such that the climate change does not affect the growing of the coffee. Another interesting paper, note they do not explicitly refer to SAP, but they are in the spirit of SAP, practice of translating pressures to respond to climate change into business as usual. So they look at how pressures to respond to climate change has been integrated into organization, leading to business as usual, and thus not really dealing with it. Yeah, so that's from my side. So I stop sharing here. I got a sign in between that my internet was weak. I hope that you could still follow and it wasn't too much disrupted. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Worked out greatly. Thanks so much for the input, David. And I would hand it over to Renate.
Hi, thanks so much. Thank you also, David, for sharing the SAP side. I will share my slides now. You let me know if you can see them. Right, is it full screen, the slides?
Not yet full screen. We can see your screen and the presentation. Now it's full screen.
Okay, perfect. So but thanks a lot. So, what are, like, again, grand challenges is a huge topic. What has been studied there and why? I think we all agree that it's bigger societal phenomena, bigger societal risks, and just as one kind of maybe more practically relevant source, I use the World Economic Forum and how they kind of list the global risks that they have. And the main kind of problem there is that they're not only wicked themselves, but the problem is that they're wickedly interrelated with each other, which kind of they nicely show and how these kind of things are actually interrelated. And I agree with what has been said before on impact, is that organizations organizing and also like disorganizing, they are relevant for all of them individually and also relevant to understand their interrelationship. So OMT and all organization theories would be really called to study them and make sure that we understand what is going on there. So thinking of what we have, all the insights that we have produced from OMT is a huge task here. And I will not be kind of really able to do justice to the OMT division here, because we have a wide range of theories and a wide range of methodologies here. And if I may think of that, SAP kind of probably has it, it's easier because you are like one more or less coherent set of thoughts, while the OMT division needs to host all kinds of theories. And I mean, my argument would be is that SAP is very welcome in the OMT family too. So there is no OMT versus SAP as has been said before, but basically an end. So what OMT studies is grand challenges at different levels of the phenomena that they study. So it's the societal, the field, the organization, group, and the individual level. Maybe individual level is very often then also in maybe also team level in the OB division, but like OMT actually does cover them all. I checked the keywords of OMT, the current ones recently, and there is not a single theory or not a single topic there that I would say I could exclude here that has never studied grand challenges in any way. So I have picked, of course, a few topics and some of the studies here, but I apologize up front for kind of having to leave out most of the research that has been done at OMT. So I start with like the more societal problems and the level of phenomena. And what has been recently studied a lot is like the rise of populism, of authoritarianism, of autocratic leadership, the role of populism and democracy, all kinds of geopolitical developments and how they influence organizations, the erosion of trust in the grand institutions of society, be that science, be that courts, be that all kinds of institutions. I've just picked very few. There has been a JMI conversation that has been led by Mike and others on authoritarianism. I've one study myself that looks at framing in the anti-vaccination movement, or all the different works on trust and the erosion of trust. And I picked like one PDW at the Academy of Management here that was actually co-sponsored by OMT and SAP and several others. So that is definitely a shared concern that we have. There's a lot of work on ecosystems in OMT and like the grand systems change that is necessary, and people who started from that side. There's studies on governance structures and how they either facilitate to try to address grand challenges or wicked problems, but how they can also be barriers and fault lines in themselves, social movements, or studies on field structuration. And again, I've allowed to have one of my own here on the list. That's the field structuration of the online climate change debate. And what we do is we look into the frames, the emotionality, and the moral foundations that these kind of websites and URLs use. And we ask like what determines, what helps to understand the field structuration and the increasing polarization that we see in that field. That's a classical social network study. Studies field configuring events. And we think of the COPE, the current COPE that's going on and the dissatisfaction. So that's again a very important topic, and still to study. Cross-sector collaborations is a huge topic here, and I'm pointing here to some of the work by Barbara Gray, who has been the OMT Distinguished Scholar in 2023, with all the work that she does on power and how to make collaborations, especially cross-sectoral collaborations, possible. There's a lot of work on how professions feed into and how they change or what they need to do when addressing these big societal problems. Institutional logics as well. And then maybe on the level of routine sense making, that's where SAP and OMT probably overlap most profoundly. And that's a lot of work on routines. That's Daniel Geiger's work, just to mention here. Work on sense making, and starting from Weib's classical study, but there is also work by Graham Dwyer, Cynthia Hardy, or Jupp Cornelissen, and many of his colleagues. Work on framing activities or learning from all kinds of crisis, decision making, or institutional work. So as I said, this is just a few of the topics and with theories that deal with these great societal concerns. And again, I apologize for everybody who should be on the slides here that I showed and who's not, but it's just a matter of time also. and of space that I have. Now, what about synergies? So we said like synergies, what is inside synergies and pathways? So synergies, I agree with speakers before me. There's multiple overlaps, but multiple complementarities, but I don't really see any whatever competition or versus or something like that. I mean, SAP is very strong in the on the ground, the actual instances. You do say that you reach out to all kinds of patterns in your flat ontology, but maybe what the patterns and what kind of drives the patterns, there's perhaps other theories that actually have worked on that a lot and may have stronger and more to say about it. So where SAP kind of fits and can speak to other theories depends a bit on the definition of practice and strategy. And what I've heard already here before is that of course is a moving target for everybody else, because it is sort of say SAP does go beyond strategy in the narrower sense of the word and includes into strategizing things like leading, framing, organizing, entrepreneuring, and so on. So a lot of things that could kind of be put into the gerund could kind of fall under what the strategy, the S kind of covers in SAP. And then also, of course, practice is an equally, say, narrow or broad term, and can range from activities in the here and now to very broad patterns of activity, depending on which kind of source one uses or at which kind of point in time particular articles were written. So I've sort of, from my phenomenological institutional theory perspective, I have a piece where we tried to fit it in and to sort of say like it can, one definition of practice may have nothing to do at all with institutions, and other definitions, and I'm thinking especially of Schatzky and Reckwitz's kind of definition of practices, are more or less very close to what, from this perspective, we would understand as institutions. So that's a very big overlap in terms of what they say. That's something I think we can talk and discuss, but I will just maybe move to pathways because my time may be running out. Is that depends heavily on the theoretical approach from OMT, and of course also, as I said, about what version of SAP the scholar we would like to collaborate with would adhere to. So I say, like, where we absolutely agree is that it's all kinds of societal concerns that we're talking about, and there's multiple types of impact that we're trying to address, to lead back to Chris's presentations, all kinds of from more conceptual to policy to practical impact. This, I think, where we have pathways and synergies for in the future as well, is that how do we bring together this like more lived experiences in the here and now and the broader patterns, because I think there is some way to cover and sort of how the deep patterns of this like authoritarianism or populism, etc., emerge out of the more local practices is something I think that could be very interesting. I also think that the role of multimodality is something we should explore more. We start to address materiality, but also visuality, the body, and all kinds of other ways of meaning making, I think, can be interesting from SAP and also from all kinds of other things. I think ethics and morality will be something that lends itself to, because we hear ethical concerns and moral standpoints a lot, and sort of to see like how the two these broader ideas and the practices actually go together. I have also AI and technology, and I very much agree to what Jennifer and Kevin said. And I just picked a very practical thing. A few days ago, we had in the news that GPT outperforms doctors when it comes to diagnosing illnesses, and they're really interested. I think the AI had over 90% and the doctors had 65%. But I think the really interesting thing is that the doctors, when they were allowed to use generative AI, it increased their performance only by 1%, like it was from 65 to 66. So it was still a huge gap. And I think like these things, I would rather have us organization theorists, study and figure out what's going on there, what kind of practices, what kind of decision-making features are happening there, instead of all experimental and the more economic people who are actually already sitting on this and studying it. So maybe that's something where I think that we could all be doing. So thanks a lot, and let me use this opportunity to also congratulate SAP for winning this year's OMT Trailblazer Award, just as a sign of the mutual appreciation that we have. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Renate, for your insights on grand challenges, and congratulations again to SAP for the award. I don't see any hands up right now for any clarification questions, so let me just take a moment to remind everybody to post your questions in the chat, because when we open the Q&A, we'll take it off from there. And without any further ado, I'll leave the floor to Renate.
Hello. My name is also Renate. I'm an assistant professor at Stockholm School of Economics, and I'm very honored to speaking here, also as the last one from the SAP track. So I will kind of give a short overview, and also you will see some overlaps with what we said before. So just a second to get my slide moving. So strategy as practice, as you all know, started out as this: what are managers, practitioners doing? What are the practices, practitioners, and praxis? That's how it all started out, trying to understand the manager in the organization. Fast forward 20 years, looking into conceptual pieces and reviews, questions are asked like, what are the practices? So where are the practices in strategy as practice? What is strategic about practices? What qualifies activities as strategic? And also how to reinstate the radical in strategy as practice research. The question is, or for me, the question is, why are all these questions asked in the context of SAP? And for me, it reflects the broadening interests of academics in the field and also those on the periphery of strategy as practice. And what I want to use this time for is to show some trends that we identified in strategy as practice and the wider field connecting also to OMT. And you will see in the following slides that the topics I addressed reflect in SAP, but also partly in OMT or also only in OMT. And that's also how I hope to show which bridges exist for SAP and OMT. So first trend is that there is a new lot of phenomena, like macro phenomena with climate change, particular, like we've seen some scholars addressing floodings, water shortages, fires. These are all contexts that also have an impact on single organizations and how strategic decisions are done. For example, like Fanny Couture has investigated companies relating how they in their teams work, relating to work to what we heard before, grand challenges. But also other contexts like war contexts, conflict-riddled zones, and also new technologies like artificial intelligence. So one trend are these new phenomena. But the question is how to study this as strategy as practice scholars who traditionally looked at the practices of individuals. So one challenge here is connecting the micro with the macro. And this is one very great opportunity for OMT to kind of help out SAP in a way, but also SAP to inform OMT. Another trend or interest is that generally, and like in the last decades, we have seen a very homogeneous type of the manager in the organization, which is, as you can see on my slide, typically quite male and white. And typically we look at corporates. But if we look a bit further, managers come from different backgrounds, they're located in different countries, and there's all types of different organizations. And there is a great interest in strategy as practice, and this is also something where there is a great bridge to be built to OMT, is studying, like collecting data in different contexts. And with that, I mean like South America, Africa, Asia, maybe also if somebody wants to go to Greenland or the Antarctic, or to the space where we have even more people working, but also looking at factors like diversity, equity, and inclusion, like having diverse work teams, either physically but also virtually, with a new phenomenon of being studied, which is openness in innovation, openness in strategy, which includes also cross-team collaboration, but also cross-hierarchical organizing. And then also to look into different forms of organizing. And I mean, NGOs, startups, virtual teams, as I mentioned, which go beyond the typical manager in the corporate organization. A third trend, and that's very interesting for those who are very much into the theory part in strategy as practice, is that traditionally it started out with practice theories and then developed also into using discourse, for example, sense making, also a little bit on institutional theory. But in the last years, you see not so much in the publications still, but a lot when you go to conferences and you listen to the presentations, that authors have started using emotions in the context of strategy as practice, attention, so the attention-based view, temporality and future making, and many others. And this is also a part where we can build a great bridge to OMT, which is drawing on all of these concepts and theories already, while in SAP, we're just basically starting out, bridging to new concepts, other concepts, but new to strategy as practice, and also trying to use these concepts either to analyze data or to theorize together with strategy as practice. And then there's a last trend, and this connects to all the others to engage with the other trends, is to use and utilize and even develop new ways of data collection and analysis, starting from using the richness of archival data that we have available, but also connecting across levels, connecting the micro, like what is this one manager doing in context of this big thing like deglobalization, climate change, floodings, fires, war. We're all affected by it, but how can we methodologically connect what's happening on the individual level to this like field or societal level? And then, of course, if somebody is really, really brave to start using quantitative methods for exploring questions in practice, strategy as practice, or other methods, obviously. So in sum, what I wanted to talk about today is that we see a few trends in strategy as practice, and that due to these trends, there's like all these questions asked, like what I presented before, where are the practices, what is actually strategic? And in order to really stick to what strategy as practice wants to explain, but also follow these trends, I think many of us see many opportunities to talk to OMT and to find many bridges and build many bridges. And lastly, for those who are interested in discussing this further, we're actually meeting in May for the Organization Studies Summer Workshop to talk about and discuss and see a lot of presentations on the future of strategizing and organizing as practice, which also could be an opportunity for continuing the talk of
Thank you very much, Renate, for sharing your input. And yeah, and over to Ignas. We can see your slides, not in full screen yet, but we can see the slides. Yes, that's perfect.
Okay, so well, it's an honor to be here and to speak to you. And let me just say that I really love this initiative of bringing SAP and OMT together. As some of you might know, we have a standing working group at Ignas on organizing best practice that brings together people from these two communities, from SAP and from OMT, working with theories of practice. So I'll be talking about researching managerial practices today. And as Renate Meyer pointed out, OMT is quite a big ship with a lot of people on it, doing a lot of different things. So instead of trying to give an overview of what's happening, I thought I will try to approach one very practical question as a random crew member of this OMT ship. And the question I want to talk to you about is where to put the practices in the paper when you're researching managerial practices. So at some point, these practices, they need to get onto the paper that you're writing, right? And I want to discuss three different options. One of them is a slightly problematic one, I would say, and two are a little better ideas. So let's go. First option, put them into the aggregate dimension of a Joya figure. I would say this is somewhat of a cautionary tale, because if the practices drop from the sky in your findings section, for instance, in such a figure, the worst case is that there is some kind of an atheoretical use of a theoretically loaded concept. And this might run you into some trouble, and some people who are more familiar or who have like a liking for these theories might not really like it, because they would say, well, but actually some things that this concept implies, they're missing in the study. Then still a pity would be that you conduct research with the ontological commitments of practice theories, but this is not transparent in the study, because the practices, they only drop from the sky somewhere in the findings, right? So I would say this option has a little bit of a question mark, whether this is the best idea, where to put these practices actually into the paper. Now, there's a second option, which is put them into the theory section. And I'm outing myself as one of these theory fetishists. So this is, of course, theory fetishist's preferred choice. And it's really, really great for papers that aim to modify or to extend the social ontology of practice theory, right? So if you consider yourself a tool builder, yeah, right, you try to build the tools that help others make sense of empirical problems and different social phenomena, this is a really, really cool thing to do. But what if your paper is not really focused on tool building, but rather on creating a contribution somewhere else, phenomenon-related, problem-driven, using these tools of practice theory that are already there, right? I mean, you don't always have to reinvent the hammer when building something out of wood, right? But some things you build out of wood can be nonetheless very useful. And even theory fetishists like myself are sometimes just interested in understanding an empirical problem and making sense of it. So this is where option 3 comes in. Put the practices into the method section. Really? Practice theory into the method section? Theory method, this is fit? I would say yes, really. And I would say this is great for papers that use the social ontology of practice theory or practice theories to elucidate phenomena and inform other discourses. And in many cases, this practice theory implies certain ontological commitments that carry certain methodological choices with them that shape how the research is done. So even if you're not about building tools, but about understanding a certain grand challenge, and you do this from a practice theoretically informed perspective, this has a clear influence how you go about the research. And so if you put it in the method section, then one thing you have to make sure is that you adapt your methods accordingly. So that means that you should have a clear idea of how do I define practices, how do I identify practices empirically, and how do I trace the connections between the practices that I try to find. And just as a little example, kind of to encourage people to go down this road. So in a recent paper that we published, we did exactly that. We had two different theoretical things already going on in the theory section, one on social enterprises, the other one on interorganizational collaboration. And I mean, you can also cramp another third theory into the theory section, but we decided to have something in our method section that says approaching empirical inquiry with a sensitivity for practices. So simply being open about the ontological commitments that this theory brings with it, and also how it then informs your whole methodological approach. Thank you very much for your attention. If you have any questions about any of the weird ideas I was sharing, feel free to reach out. Thanks a lot.
So thank you again for our speakers on the topic of how to research actually this managerial practices. So thank you, Renate, and thank you, Ignas.
Thank you to all of you. Thank you for the reflections and thanks for joining us. We'll surely continue this conversation. And if you would like to contribute to either of the communities, please always feel free to reach out and get in touch with us. We always organizing great things, and yeah, please get in touch and help us to keep this conversation going, and have a good afternoon.